Hello, everyone. We are here today with a guest. We've kind of found it. She found us on Instagram and then filled out the form online. And we've kind of had some, it's been rescheduled a few times. So we're really excited today to have Mariela Andersen coming from Atlanta, Georgia. Also, she has a book called Home Sweet Casa, A Journey to the Universal Heart. She'll tell us where you can get that. And anyway, hi, Mariella. It's so nice to have you finally.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, we're excited.
Thank
So,
you.
so we'll probably just dig in and ask you, your adoption story as we do.
Yeah,
Okay.
start from the beginning.
Okay. So I'm an international adoptee. I was adopted from Bogota, Colombia in 1990, and I was brought to the United States and raised here by my parents. I also have two brothers who are also adopted from Colombia, and adoption has just always been an open topic in our household. We never felt like we
And are
couldn't.
your brothers are not biological to you?
Correct.
Are they biological to each other?
Nope.
Okay. And were
They're
you
all.
the oldest?
I was the middle.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So my older brother was adopted, I think like 1988, 89 or something like that. And then years later, they went and adopted me. And then 2 years after they adopted me, we went back as a family and adopted my younger brother. And I have like some memories of that, but I was only like 2 or 3 years old. So it's like very vague, vague memories. Um, but I think because of all of us kind of seeing each other being adopted in a way, it was very open. Like I don't ever remember being told I was adopted. We just always knew we were adopted. And my parents, I just think they never wanted us to feel shame around it. So, like, if we had questions, they would just stop whatever they were doing to talk to us about it. And I remember even as a child, like, if I wanted to stay up late, I knew if I asked to talk about my adoption, then they would like talk about my adoption.
What
um,
were you raised in Atlanta? Like you were taken from
yeah, I lived in
Bogota?
Virginia until I was 3 years old, and then the rest of my life, I've been here in Atlanta.
Okay.
And we're all three of you adopted from the same agency or
Yes.
whatever. Yeah.
It was called Fauna, and
Mm.
I'm not sure what that acronym actually stands for because it's all in Spanish. But it's an orphanage that's still currently in
Oh,
Bogota. Yeah.
okay.
And are your parents white?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
All
And
right.
they don't
Got the factuals.
Spanish. Yeah. They don't know any Spanish. I grew up not really knowing much of anything about Colombian culture. They always, spoke very highly of Colombians and would say that Colombians are beautiful people and the culture is beautiful. But I just like that was pretty much the gist that I had of it. I didn't know like details,
Mhm.
but was proud to be Colombian because of that. So I was always like a proud little Latina. Granted, I had no idea what that meant. um, so fast forward to the age of 22. Actually, fast forward to the age of around 19. I decided to contact Fauna, the orphanage, and ask for a picture of my biological mother because growing up, my parents had told me that when I was 18, I was allowed to like initiate a search if I ever wanted to. And I guess I kind of like forgot that that was even a thing because I just was like, okay, well, can't deal with it till I'm 18 anyway. So I just kind of didn't even try think about it.
Did they give you any non-identifying information or like any, story that may or may not have been true that they were told?
Yes, yeah. So they were told, so then they told me that my biological mother was 19 years old when she had me. She had no support, like her family and her weren't very close. And that one of the main reasons she wanted me to be adopted was because she didn't want me to wonder why I didn't have a dad because apparently my birth father, once he found out she was pregnant, didn't want to have anything to do with her or me. Um, and I guess without that familial support, she just was like, okay, like, let me go ahead and do this. Um, Granted, now that I know her, I've been told other stories, which is a whole nother thing. But that was the story that I heard growing up. And, as a result, I always kind of felt like, and maybe it was the way my parents, made it sound too. But just that, like, she decided to give me up as for adoption from a place of love and like wanting what was best for me. So, yeah.
I'm excited
So,
to hear the rest of it.
yeah. Okay, so I was 19 and I contacted the orphanage, and I guess I'd always kind of thought that like I had to go to the orphanage to get that picture because my mom and dad had told me that when they adopted us that they could see like a wall full of little pictures of biological parents, and that they didn't know which one of those was my birth mom, but like they knew that her picture was over there somewhere. So I, growing up, always kind of had this idea of one day I'll go and see that wall and see that picture. But then with technology and everything, I was like, let me just see if they can scan it, and send it over. So I contacted them, and like a couple weeks later, they sent me back like a whole document that they had scanned with that picture. And I was just like so shocked to even have this picture of my biological mom. She didn't look like happy in it, but like I could see a lot of like similarities, like our nose shape, our face shape, our eye shape. And like I just broke down crying and was like, oh my God, like just overwhelmed with emotions. Um,
So they have I'm somewhat impressed with their record keeping and that they send everything just pretty freely. They're still like that. Have you been down there?
It is a lot later than when we were, right?
Right.
So
But
by
even
the time,
yeah. Well, it's weird because
never mind.
I didn't have
Well,
any
Go ahead.
have any issues finding, getting the information from them, but I've heard from other adoptees who are also adopted from them that they felt like their records were destroyed or lied about. So, I don't want to say that they're 100%.
Yeah, I wondered that.
Yeah.
was this around that time that there was like a big push to adopt from Colombia and from South America? That's what
It's possible because my parents had friends that had also adopted from Colombia, and that's kind of what inspired them to go that route. Because I was like, that's so random. Like, why Colombia? And they were like, well, we had friends and we loved their kids. So, we were inspired. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we had another guest who had an article that was written.
Yes.
And so a lot of people probably, right. That wasn't there. I don't remember
It was
where
like
the
on
article.
the New York Times Magazine or something about adopting. Yes, it might have been a little bit earlier. Not much earlier though.
No, not much.
Yeah, it's very possible. Now I think the rules have even changed more. I'm not 100% about this, but I've heard that it's like almost impossible to adopt from Colombia now unless you can prove that you're also Colombian.
Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of international adoptions now. And certainly Guatemala is closed. The Eastern Bloc is closed. There's a lot of it's just not happening anymore.
Yeah, and like there's a part of me that's like, oh, I hope those kids are able to find homes, but then there's another part of me that's like, that's so good that they're going to be raised with people who can teach them their culture and they can keep their language and stuff that like I never had a chance to have. So yeah. Okay, so I found that picture. I got that picture, and I broke down in tears, was overwhelmed with emotions. And that kind of initiated my search. It just having that picture alone like filled something in me, but then I just kind of was like, well, like, let's see if I can actually find her. And if anything, I just wanted to say, like, thank you for your decision. Like, don't regret it. I have a good life. Because I always kind of felt like there was maybe some, I'm sure I just kind of felt like her grief in a way. Like, even though I had never met her, I just kind of felt like maybe she had questioned her decision and maybe felt really bad about it. And it turns out that was the case. And maybe that's just like common sense. Like anyone might feel that way about their biological mothers, but So when I was
Did you
20,
have her name when they sent you the information?
so that information, like I had already had her name in some other documents, but there's just so much paperwork and it was all kind of scattered around and it was all in Spanish. So like when I looked at it growing up, like it didn't really make that much sense to me. But this time when they had sent me that document and it was like, everything was laid out and I had her what's called a cedula number, which is like their equivalent of kind of like their social security number or like a license number. It's just like an ID number. And that number is what helped me find her. And so I ended up going into like, I don't know like why I decided to do this, but I was like, let me try and find people in Colombia that can help me find her. Because if you just type that stuff in on Google, like her name and the number, like nothing's going to come up, or it's just like a bunch of Spanish stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what this says. So I ended up finding like Colombian chat rooms, and of course, like people are not in there for like helping people find their adopted family, but a few people who were like willing to help me, just like hearing my story. But unfortunately, like they weren't able to like find her.
Had you not heard of any sort of like Colombian adoption communities at that point? So this was what, 2009 at this you're talking?
At that point, no. And then I actually ended up around, it must have been like around 2009, 2010, 2011. So I don't even know. So one of those years I found a Facebook page that was called Adopted from Colombia. And that like opened a world of possibilities for me. And I met someone who directed me to a search agent who lived in Colombia, and like this was her job. And since I was her first client from the United States, she was willing to help me for free, which was so helpful because I was in college at the time. And I sent her all the information that I had. And within like a couple weeks, she told me that I had a brother. She had found my brother first. Yeah. And she said he was 4 years younger than me. And then, so like just having that information, I was like, oh my gosh, like, and then maybe a couple days after that, she told me that she had found my biological mom.
Was your brother in Colombia?
Yeah, he was. Yeah. She didn't contact him. She just had found him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he was, well, you'll tell us, I guess, adopted or no, or
he was not adopted.
Okay.
No. And later I found out he was actually my half brother. Okay. So then she contacted me a couple days later and she said she did find my birth mom, and that if we wanted to call her, we could. And, at that time we were using Skype and not Zoom. So I Skyped with her, and it was so serendipitous because I actually had just come back from like a Zumba class with one of my friends who ironically spoke Spanish, and she just needed to use the restroom before she went back home. So I had let her come in, and when she was using the restroom is when I had opened this message from the search agent saying, if you want to call her, we can. And if my friend who spoke Spanish hadn't have been there at that time, like I wouldn't have understood any of the conversation that was about to happen. So it was just kind of like,
that's
serendipitous. Yeah.
And you get to be friends quickly with that friend, right?
So she helped me translate. So I called, her name was Carolina, the search agent. I called her on Skype, and then she put my birth mom on speakerphone, and then my friend was translating it all. And the first thing that my birth mom said was, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And here I am just trying to say thank you. And like, you don't have anything to feel bad about. But it just validated that everything that I had felt, like that pain that I felt that she felt, was true. So she at that point had not told anyone in her family that she had given up a child for adoption. So she told me to please wait like a week or so and to give her some time to like break the news. And I was really worried that like I wasn't going to hear from her anymore after that, or like she wasn't going to tell them anything. But to my surprise, a couple of days later, I started getting all these Facebook requests from all these different relatives. And I was like, whoa. And yeah.
So
what about your brother? Did he
Yes, yeah, he was there. And then I also found out that I had a sister who at that time was only 3 years old. And she just was like, it was like seeing a little Colombian mini me, and that's been interesting too. She's actually like 14, 15 years old now. But in a way, like when I look at her and her life, it's almost like seeing what my life would have looked like.
Ah.
No.
And how is it? Is it a tight community? Is it a lot like would it have been that's interesting. You kind of actually see the
Yeah. Okay, so I will say it's a tight community in terms of like the familial bond, like, and that I think is just common in Latin culture in general. I found out that when my mom had me, she wasn't living with my family. She was in another city. So it's easier for her to have a baby and no one find out about it. But then when she had moved back with them, family's family. So like they're all together all the time. And so in a way, I felt like I kind of like missed out on that, like, cause they're just so tight. And I'm very close to my parents here, but like, I have two, like I said, I have two brothers and like, they're both in other states. We don't talk that often. And I think that's kind of common in American culture in general, like you grow up in the house and that's it. You start your own life. But in Colombian culture, like you are always in contact, you're always close. They're always helping each other in different ways. And I felt like I kind of missed out on that for sure.
And so her parents never knew about you.
Right.
Okay.
Until this.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're flooded with Facebook requests.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. And this is another like serendipitous type thing. At least I feel anyways. So the only person that she had told about me was her current husband. And the way that happened was like one day she was, it was after she had given me up for adoption. She was really depressed. She had this huge secret she was holding inside of her. She was walking down the street. She was feeling like suicidal. Honestly, she like wasn't doing well. And she got into a taxi and she was just crying and crying. And the taxi driver asked her like what was wrong. And she ended up just like unloading on this taxi driver and telling him everything. And that taxi driver ended up being her husband and the father of my two half siblings.
Wow.
I know.
He sounds like a great guy.
And I'm thinking like, so if I had never been adopted, would my half siblings even exist?
There's a whole bunch of things you can go down rabbit holes.
Yes. And then did she well, I have a couple questions. Did you learn Spanish in these last 13 years?
Yeah. So
10 years or how long?
Yeah, it's been about okay, so fast forward a little bit more. When I was 22, I actually went to Colombia and met them for the first time in person. Went by myself, no translator. I stayed for 2 weeks. I felt like I had to go alone because it was just so much emotion and I didn't know like what to expect like my emotions to be because there was just so many. And I didn't want to have to worry about like if I brought my parents, like how are they feeling right now? Or like if I had brought my friends, like I just didn't want to have to worry about anyone else. I just needed that time for me to process everything, which was actually really hard and scary. But in hindsight, like I know I grew a ton as a person from it. So I went down there and, I didn't know any Spanish. But after that, like, because I was still living with my parents, I was still in college. And then even after I had started working, I was living with my parents for a while. So I was able to save my paychecks and use that money to travel. So after I found them, like every 6 months for several years, I was going back.
Were your parents like supportive? Did they have any feelings about it? Or did they keep that to themselves if they did have feelings about it?
So when I had first found her, they were a little bit like, they weren't like unsupportive, but I could tell that there was a hesitation in them. Like I wasn't sure what it was exactly. But then later on we talked about it and they said they were just worried that like, they didn't know if it was going to be actually my birth mom or if it's someone just claiming to be my birth mom. And they didn't want me to get hurt. A lot of it was just like fear of like, how am I going to take it? But like, honestly, they have been so supportive. And I'm so thankful for them to them for that. And even now, like if things come up, with my birth mom and stuff, I can talk to them and like just, I don't know, I just feel so supported by them. I'm so grateful for them
Yeah, that's great because that's not always the case.
Exactly. And I've learned that like as I've met so many other adoptees, it's sad how like few of them feel even comfortable talking about adoption, let alone finding their families, let alone after they find their families, like everything that comes with it,
Yeah. And have they met each other?
Yeah. So my second trip, I brought my parents with me, and that was crazy.
Sure.
I was so afraid that like they wouldn't get along, and like I wasn't sure what to expect. But I honestly just felt like there was just so much love involved in that trip. Like, and it was very cathartic. I feel like everyone healed in some way from it. But I'm sure also it like opened up more questions too, and because again, we didn't have a translator. So it was we were limited on how deep we could go in conversation. I think Google Translate did exist at that time, but for whatever reason, we didn't utilize it. I don't know why. I think just in the moment, you're trying to figure out what everyone's saying. But the energy of love was like very much present, and it, actually like that's kind of like why I titled the second part of my book A Journey to the Universal Heart, because I felt like I was able to tap into that universal heart just by having so much love present, and realize like we can all tap into that. When you put your judgments aside, when you put your fears aside, and you just like connect. And I feel like that's what we were kind of forced to do. So yeah.
I love that. That is just so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Really, really awesome experience that we don't hear often.
Yeah. That I changed as a person after going there.
Of course. And has this inspired your brothers at all? Like that's their story, but in general, has that?
About a year or two after I found my biological mom and my whole family, my older brother started searching for his, and he found his birth family. And this is another weird thing, serendipity, I don't know. His birth mom lived about 4 blocks away from my birth mom.
And did they know each other?
No, but they had seen each other on the streets many times.
Oh, I'm sure. Walking, whatever.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, like that's just so strange to me to imagine, like, I was just thinking if I had found out that my neighbor, we both had given up kids for adoption that were raised together in a whole nother country.
Yes.
You have no idea that that's even the case. Like, it's crazy. Yeah.
And did he have a good experience?
I think he did. He, I think, approached it a little different than me. And I don't know if he's even still in contact with them, because like I said, I'm not even really in contact with him to know what's going on with that. But I think that it did, at least give him that closure of seeing where he came from. And he also had siblings, and he got close with them, and he visited fairly often after he found them. But I'm not sure, like, and actually I was going to say, I'm not sure how often he still visits them, but there was also a time period where he moved to Colombia, and he was living in Medellin, which it's kind of far away from Bogota. So it wasn't right with them, but I'm sure that finding them inspired him to move there, and get his roots.
So, back to your story. What about your biological father?
So that is where things take a turn. I waited to ask my birth mom about my biological father for several years, because I didn't want to offend her in any way. And I didn't want her to feel like I wasn't satisfied with the connection that I had just made with her. But, naturally, I was still curious, like, what about this other part?
An adoptee taking care of people.
Yeah, I was going to say same thing.
Yeah, sorry, my life. So eventually I finally worked up the nerve to ask her about him, and like I said, growing up, I had these parents who were so open with me, and, knew that even when I found my birth family, like, even if they had any insecurities and doubts, they knew this was my journey and my story, and they supported that. And I guess because I had parents like that, I automatically assumed that my birth mom would be the same way. I was wrong. When I finally asked her about him, she got very defensive and was like, I don't want to talk about it. And that totally rubbed me the wrong way, because I was like, how dare her not let me know this part of me? Like, this is my story. And I felt like she was like the gatekeeper of like the last puzzle piece or something. And then probably like 3-4 months later, she randomly messaged me and said that she was ready to talk to me about him. And so I was like, okay, great, you know. And
had you had no contact in those 3 or 4 months?
No, we had talked some, and like, you know, WhatsApp and everything. But I think the vibe definitely changed, you know, after that. Like, where it was like at first, like very exciting and like, you know, wanting this almost like this magical mother-daughter connection that I had honestly like fantasized about my whole life, even as a little girl, like thought that if I ever meet her, like there's just going to be such a strong bond, you know. And but then that wasn't really the case. You know, it was even before that, it took me a little while to accept that she was my birth mom, because I had this fantasy of her in my mind, and the fantasy didn't match the reality. And I had to accept, like, this is where I came from, and this isn't what I expected, for many reasons. But then, you know, including her not being honest with me about my biological father. So I, you know, when she finally did decide to open up with me and tell me about him, she told me his name and what he did for work, and maybe a couple other details, like maybe like how he like looked and stuff, which I had already had that information in my parents' paperwork, because they had written notes when they adopted me, and it said he was like, you know, dark hair, dark eyes. I mean, we're Colombian, surprise, surprise. But still, like, it was nice to know that. So I, you know, thanked her for giving me this information, and I tried to find him with it, but I couldn't. And then I just kind of dropped it. And then maybe like 6 months later, I asked for it again, because I had forgotten what she had told me. Like, I never wrote it down, I guess, you know. But then when I asked for it again, she got really defensive. Like, I already told you. And I was like, well, why is it such a big deal? You know, like, why is she getting defensive? And so that kind of like put a red flag in my mind of like, okay, like maybe she wasn't honest when she told me the first time. Maybe she forgot what she told me and she doesn't want to get caught in a lie. So I just said, please, like, I'm so sorry that I forgot, but can you please tell me again? So she told me again. And this time I made it a point to write it down. And I like pre-planned, and 3 months from now, I'm going to ask her again. But this time I have this paper with his name on it that she just gave me. And so 3 months later, I asked her again. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot. Like, can you please tell me again? She told me again, and it was a completely different name.
I wondered.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't like blow up on her or anything. I just kind of was like, all right, this tells me a lot. Like, I now know I can't trust her, at least when it comes to this situation. So, okay. So I took both the names that she had given me, and I actually found a man who had a combination of those names, and he lived in the same city that she had told me about, did the same job that she had told me about. And I contacted him, and I found out that he actually did date her around the time that I would have been conceived. But when I mentioned to him that it was possible he might be my birth father, he was like, well, no, no, because we weren't even intimate like that. But I mean, I may not be able to trust him either, you know? So I went back and forth with him a little bit, and I at one point asked him, would he be willing to take a DNA test? And then he was like, I'll take one if you can find me a job in the United States.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Strings attached.
I was like, okay, I give up, whatever. I'm just not ever going to know if this is him or not. Like, and I kind of have like a gut feeling it might be him. My parents think that he looks like me. I don't really see it, but like, it's possible. I just think I take a lot more from like my biological mom's side. But so like, there's in a way, like I have a little closure with that, but like not a lot. But it's so strange because last year on my birthday, not that he would ever really know my birthday, but I think I had told him at some point, you know, but on my birthday, he looked at my Instagram stories. He doesn't follow me, but he looked at my Instagram stories on my birthday, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And I messaged him and I said, hey, I just saw you looked at my Instagram stories on my birthday. Are you sure you're not my birth father? And he read it and then never responded.
Wow.
So like, it could very well be him. But it's so weird because when I after I'd been in contact with him for a while, maybe a year later, I told my birth mom, hey, FYI, I know you lied. I found him. We're in contact. And then she was like, oh, no. He was just a cover up. He was. So I'm like, and then she came up with a story saying that the real thing is that apparently she was at a bar drinking, depressed, and she woke up in a hotel by herself. And she thinks it was like, she described this man as a wolf in sheep's clothing. So then it made it sound like she was raped. And then I remember believing it in the moment, and I took off work that day because I was like, I'm a product of rape. My whole life perspective just changed, at least about myself, and it didn't, but in that moment it was a big thing to hear.
So did she make that up?
I feel like she might have, because going all the way back to the adoption papers, why would she have told the orphanage all this information? She could have very well lied at that point, or told the truth. If it was really about, if she was really, sexually abused, she could have said at that point, before I was adopted, told the orphanage that. And I don't think she would have had any negative repercussions for that. So I think it kind of came down to like, maybe I did find the right guy and she got scared. And now she's going to create another story.
Does she suffer from depression? Because you've mentioned a couple times about her depression.
She has a lot of things going on. It's hard because I don't want to like throw her under the bus or anything.
Right. Well, no, but
she's definitely, she struggles. And then in addition to the birth father lying, all that situation, pretty soon after I found her, probably within like a year or two, she started asking me for money. And that really like just changed the dynamic between us. I started to feel like I was a bank, that she was seeing me as a resource instead of a person. And I would tell her this and be so open with how I was feeling, and expect her to receive it and change it. And she wouldn't. She would say, oh, okay, I'm sorry. But then like, a month or two later, she'd be doing it all over again. And now it's like, it's just this pattern, and it's continued, almost 10 years later, she still asks me for money. And I've given her some in the past. And when I first found her and I saw her situation, because, Colombia is a, developed country, and
does she live in poverty?
Yeah, she does.
Poverty does strange things to people.
Yeah. And so it's like, I have this empathy for her, and I understand that she's like almost in survival mode, just trying to like make ends meet. And I get it. And I want to help her, but I have to also take care of myself and like pay my own bills. And I feel like part of it, I think, is some of it, like she, how their view of Americans are rich, they have money. And even if I tell her that I'm just trying to make ends meet over here, like she may not believe that, because it looks like I have a lot, but in reality, I work in the school system. So I'm just trying to survive over here too.
Yeah.
So I actually at one point saved several paychecks. This was when I was still living with my parents. And because my birth mom, her job is that she makes food in her house, and then she goes in the streets and she sells it in these little like containers, like styrofoam containers. And I thought, well, how about getting her a food cart and helping her have a place on the street to produce, sell, everything. And that would, I think help her be more financially independent. And so I saved like a couple $1,000s for this food cart. And I went down there and I gave it to her for Christmas. I gave her the money. I put it in a nice new wallet. And I put a little card that I had translated into Spanish. And I drew a picture of it and was like, I won this. Like, it was a big deal for me to give her a gift. And she was so thankful. And everyone, I remember in the room, the rest of my family clapped and was like, woohoo, because she had been coming to them for money for a while too. And then I went with her to pick out which food cart she wanted. It was kind of like a pay half now, pay half later situation. So we paid the first half, picked out everything she wanted, and then I had to come back to the United States. So I didn't get to see the end of the process. But then I would ask her about like, oh, like, how's the food cart going? Like, did you get it? Did you get it? And she would like change the subject, or like I would see it. I never saw that food cart. And I'm like convinced that she went back and canceled the order, got the money, and then just kept it and spent it on other stuff. And she's told me that, oh no, it's in storage, and oh no, that there's new law now, you can't have food carts in the streets. And maybe that is the case, but like I've seen plenty over there. So it's kind of like, do it anyways.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like it's been hard for me to like have that close connection that I always kind of thought we would have because of that have happened. And I feel like I've caught her in several lies. Also, she'll like ask me, she knows that I have such a big heart for my younger sister. So she'll say like, oh, she needs books for school, or she needs a new uniform, or, things that she doesn't have money to take care of her with. And for a while I was even helping with that when I could. It was, a little bit here and there. But I've like put boundaries up over time to where it's less and less, and to the point where now it's mostly no. And like, maybe if I'm able to send a little bit, I will, like $50, because I remember at one point I was even paying for my little sister to join like cheerleading and roller skating, because I was thinking like I had those opportunities growing up to be a part of sports and different stuff, like activities, like she should too. But I wasn't able to keep up with it because it was like, now she needs new skates, new costumes, new this, new that. And I was, I can't, and then it stopped being about my younger sister and started being about like medical stuff. And that really like was hard, because she would tell me things like my birth mom's, having medical problems, and tell me that like she's not even sure she's going to make it through the night because she's just so in pain. And she needs this medicine to help her, but she can't afford it. And like, of course, the first time I heard that, I was like, okay, and I scrambled some money, I sent it to her. But then I've seen the pattern. It like never ends. Like now she needs the appointment money, and then she needs, I mean, how many things can come up with stuff, never ending. So I was just kind of at a point where I knew if I kept giving her stuff, like I was going to end up not literally living under a bridge, but like she would probably let me end up living under a bridge to just keep sending her stuff,
Yeah, it shifts the dynamic a lot.
Yeah.
And
that poverty mindset, and also like that cart really could have been, but I it seems like she's not able to see the bigger picture. She's so scrambling in the moment. Is she still married?
She is still married. So that man she married, he's actually like 20, 30 years older than she is. Like he's around her father's age. And so he's, he has his own health issues. So I haven't been back in about 4 or 5 years. And a lot of it's because, well, for one, it costs money to travel. And for two, like, it doesn't feel as like loving and welcoming and appealing as it used to, because I feel like guilted about going back. Say it's been this years, like you don't care about us anymore. And also she compares, so I married a Brazilian man, and I've been back to Brazil a couple times to meet his family, and my mother-in-law passed away earlier last year, and so we went back to be there with his family for that. And when my birth mom found out that we were there again, she was like, oh, I see now who's more important. Your Brazilian family is more important. And I'm like, it's not all like, and it's just like, I don't want to go out of guilt. I want to go because I want to go.
Yeah.
So when I feel that I'm ready to go back, I for sure will. But I just don't feel that pull right now. And I also can kind of foresee me getting there and her continuing to guilt trip me over many other things, like, oh, my body's suffering, I need food, I need money, or I need medical stuff, like whatever it is, and me feeling this burden of like, it's my responsibility to help and fix the situation, but really it's not. And I've had to like, work with my therapist and, people around me that care about me to see like, that's not my responsibility to take care of her. I had just from the beginning wanted to let her know that she made the right choice, and I was thankful. And in a way, I feel like I opened a can of worms. But I am like, I wouldn't regret it. I don't regret it because, like I said, it made me change as a person. I grew a lot. And I have that closure of seeing like where I came from and like what my life might have looked like. But it definitely has not been easy being in reunion either.
It doesn't sound like it. What about your half brother? Is he?
So I am like so sad that he doesn't want to be closer with me. And that's kind of been the vibe from the beginning. And I've had to kind of retrain my mind to look at it from the perspective of how would I feel if I was in his shoes. And I just found out that my mother had lied to me after, at that time, 18 years, because he was 18 when I found them. And he had given up so much of his life to help take care of her and her bills and her problems.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't go to college because he was like,
I was wondering if he had to do a lot of that.
Dead. And, then for me to come, this little American, let me help you. Here's this. And at the beginning, it was like that. But I couldn't keep up with it because when I moved out of my parents' house and started having to pay my own bills, like I just didn't have that extra income to be sending to them. And, it wasn't even my place to do it in the beginning, but I just felt compassion for their situation and wanted to. But when it became expected was when I, the vibes changed. So
and he's a young man still. He may come around and
yeah, I hope so. I sent him a Merry Christmas text that I never got any response to this past Christmas, and he's very distant. But it's weird because whenever I've gone there, like he's really sweet, but I just think that he wants us to just both live our own separate lives. And I'm like, okay. And I can't help but think that maybe he's influenced my younger sister too, because she has a phone now, she's older. And so we'll text sometimes. And it's like, what I do hear back from her, it's, it feels like a good dynamic, like I'll tell her I love her and she'll tell me it back, but also it's her age, she's only 14. So I have to give her time to grow up too. And I hope that in the future with her, I can at least have a good relationship. Yeah. I love her so much. And I've always wanted a sister and to have this sweet little Colombian mini me, like I just love her so much. And I hope one day we can be close. And I really, I can see that. I just, I, at the same time, don't want to put too much expectations on anything, just kind of letting things happen the way they need to happen.
Yeah. Letting them flow.
Yeah.
I have a younger half sister. Well, I have two, but the little mini me is 20 years younger than I am. And I met her when she was 13. So.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. She's 18 years younger. So it's about that same age difference.
Yeah. I loved it because I hadn't had sisters either. I had brothers. So.
Yeah. Are you guys still in contact?
Uh-huh. We'll go months and months without talking, but we have such a bond that with both of my sisters, but on my birth mother's side. Yeah. But
that's great. Yeah. I often send her pictures of the times that we were together because I have so many and I would post them on my Facebook all the time when I was there. And so now they always pop up in my memories. So I'll send them and be like, this was 7 years ago today or whatever. And then she'll be like, oh, and that's honestly like right now the extent of our communication where I just send pictures and then she's like, oh, and then I'm like, I love you. And she's like, I love you too. But a lot of times like she just won't even open my messages or won't respond. And it's easy to get in my head and think, oh, it's because my brother's convinced her not to be close with me, or maybe it's my birth mom's mad that I didn't send her money, or but then I just try to remember, like, she's only 14.
She's 14.
Right. She's 14. 14-year-old girls are.
Yeah, like they don't. Yeah,
they're like another species.
Exactly. So I let her be her, and if it's meant to be in the future, then it will. So
I have a feeling it will be. I have a feeling as your mother ages and she gets older, maybe she makes a visit. You never know.
Yeah, I would love that. I actually dedicated my book to my little sister.
Oh, well, speaking of your book, because can you please tell everybody where to get this book?
Yes. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's called Home Sweet Casa, A Journey to the Universal Heart. and you can get it on Amazon. It's also on the Walmart website. I'm not sure how it got there, but I'm glad.
All right.
That's funny.
Yeah, and it's also available as an ebook on Amazon.
Okay.
So
Great.
you just type in Home Sweet Casa book, it should pop up.
We'll put it in our show notes too, the link
Okay,
when it's on, of course. So send people to it. You can send us the link. This is just what a story. I had no idea when we
my
got on
mind
this
is
morning and
going with it.
Yeah, it's just really, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And the book, it takes the reader through the first 2 visits. So the one where I went by myself and the one I brought my parents to, and then some of that processing that happened in between of like, I mean, just there was so much to process when I came back.
It's good for adoptees in reunion too, because Sarah and I were speaking about it recently. It's just the beginning, right? It's really not, everyone thinks, oh, they're in reunion now. That's just the beginning of the story.
Exactly.
Yes. So much to come.
Yes. That's not the end of the story. It's the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah.
Crazy because like the book kind of ends on like a somewhat rosy note. And then I'm like, oh, and then so much more happened because all that stuff I told you about, like my birth father and the money, like it's not.
That means you need a second book.
I was just going to say the same. It's time to write part 2.
I know. And also I want to say that this book actually was originally a journal because since I had gone by myself, I had no one to talk to about everything I was feeling. So I just journaled everything. And then I transformed that journal into this book. So it is very raw.
Love that.
I know. I'd like to read it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll stay in touch because we want you know, you have a lot of life ahead. We want to hear about things.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm actually working on a children's book right now that's very similar. It's adoption oriented. It's very similar to my book, but it's, you know, very condensed because it's a children's book, obviously. But I will let you guys know when that comes out as well.
Please.
Yeah, please do. And please let us know any developments you might have going further.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you so much, Mariella.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.